I used to think we had one of those enviable marriages, the kind that others talked about with a little bit of jealousy, maybe even admiration. Sherry and I had been married for 8 years, and for the most part, it had been good. We were both successful in our careers. Her as a marketing executive for a major cosmetics company, and me as a regional manager for an IT firm. The kind of couple who had their routines, their shared hobbies, their friends, and their little traditions. At least, that's what I thought. But the thing about routines is that they can blind you. You get so caught up in the day-to-day, in thinking that everything's okay, that you stop noticing the little cracks forming underneath. I guess I had stopped paying attention to those cracks a long time ago. When I walked through that door, I was expecting the usual warm welcome. Sherry's bright smile, maybe a quick hug, some small talk about how the trip went. But lately, things had been different. Subtle, almost imperceptible changes that would have gone unnoticed if it weren't for this nagging feeling I couldn't shake. Let me backtrack a bit. Sherry and I met at a business conference 9 years ago. She was magnetic from the moment I saw her, effortlessly confident, with this sharp, witty charm that drew people in. It was one of those whirlwind romances, dating for just over a year before we decided to get married. Our wedding was intimate, just close friends and family, nothing extravagant, and that was fine with us. We weren't the type to flaunt things. Life was simple, and at the time, it felt like everything was falling into place. She'd always been ambitious. That was one of the things that attracted me to her drive. But with ambition came a lot of late nights, business trips, and social events that she had to attend for work. It wasn't just me working long hours anymore. Sherry was often out late, too. I guess, looking back, that's when I should have noticed the first signs. I had my own career to manage, too. Being a regional manager at my firm meant frequent travel, overseeing multiple branches, making sure everything was running smoothly. My job wasn't 9 to 5, it was more like 9 to whenever. Sherry's career wasn't much different. It wasn't unusual for both of us to be away from home for days at a time. For the longest time, I thought we were handling it well. We still found time for each other on weekends, date nights, lazy Sundays spent in bed, short weekend getaways to recharge. But things had begun to shift in the last year, slowly at first. I noticed it, though I tried to convince myself it wasn't a big deal. It started with her phone. The first time I noticed something off, it was her phone. Sherry had always been a little protective of her privacy. Weren't we all? But recently, she'd become more guarded about it. The phone was always face down, notifications silenced. I caught her on more than one occasion, quickly locking it when I walked into the room, and when I asked about it, she brushed it off as just work stuff. "It's nothing, Rob," she'd say with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just some emails I have to get to. You know how it is." And yeah, I did know how it was. We both worked in industries where communication was constant, but something about the way she handled that phone made my gut churn. I never pushed, though. It felt invasive. I told myself I trusted her, even though there were these tiny seeds of doubt slowly taking root. Then there were the work trips. Sherry had always traveled for work, but lately her trips had become more frequent and longer. She would come back late at night, sometimes after midnight, slipping into bed without waking me, or so she thought. I'd ask her about the trip in the morning, but her answers felt rehearsed, mechanical, as if she was just trying to get through the conversation. I chalked it up to stress. Her job was demanding after all. But there was something in her tone, something in the way she avoided eye contact that didn't sit right with me. Our conversations grew more distant. The laughter we once shared, those inside jokes that would make us crack up in the middle of dinner, they faded. I found myself talking more to the TV at night than to her. And then came the girls' nights. Sherry had a tight-knit group of friends she'd known since college, and they would get together regularly, which had never been a problem before. But lately, those nights out had become a little too frequent. She'd leave the house all dressed up, her perfume lingering in the air long after she was gone. She'd come back hours later, tipsy and affectionate, acting as if everything was perfectly normal. Except it wasn't. I could feel it deep down, gnawing at me. One Friday night, I stayed up waiting for her to get home. She'd gone out with her friends again, and I had that same uneasy feeling I'd been carrying for weeks. It was nearly 1 a.m. when I heard her, key in the door. She slipped in quietly, almost like she was trying not to wake me, but I was sitting on the couch, staring at the door, waiting. "Late night?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. She jumped, surprised to see me awake. "Yeah, just lost track of time. You know how it is with the girls," she said, her voice light, but there was something off in the way she spoke. I watched her as she poured herself a glass of water, her back to me. The tension between us felt thicker than it ever had before, but I couldn't put my finger on why. It was just different. I wanted to ask her more, wanted to get to the bottom of why she seemed so distant lately, but I didn't. I couldn't bring myself to start that conversation. Maybe I was afraid of the answer. Maybe I already knew. That night, lying in bed next to her, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. I knew something was wrong, but I kept telling myself that it was just stress, that we were both just too busy. People in marriages go through phases, don't they? I convinced myself this was just one of those phases, and soon enough, things would go back to the way they used to be. But deep down, I was afraid that they wouldn't. Something had changed between us, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. The cracks in our marriage were there, and they were only getting bigger. I just didn't know yet how deep they really went. It was a Tuesday evening when everything began to fall apart. I had just come home from another long day at the office, ready for the usual routine: dinner, a drink, maybe a little bit of conversation with Sherry before we both retreated into our separate corners of the house. But as soon as I stepped through the door, I could feel something had shifted. The air was thick with tension, a heaviness that clung to the walls. Sherry was sitting at the dining table, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. She didn't look up when I walked in, didn't greet me like she usually would. I saw her jaw tense, her lips a tight line, as though she was bracing herself for something. My stomach twisted into a knot. "Hey," I said, trying to shake off the weirdness of the moment. I hung my jacket on the coat rack and walked toward her. "Everything all right?" She finally looked up, and the look in her eyes made my heart sink. There was something there: guilt, anger, maybe even fear. But whatever it wasn't the Sherry I knew. "Rob," she started, her voice low, almost defeated. "We need to talk." The way she said it, so calm and calculated, made my blood run cold. The words every married man dreads hearing. I stood there, my pulse quickening, every nerve in my body suddenly on high alert. "Okay." I dragged the word out, trying to keep my voice even. "What's going on?" She looked down at her phone, the screen casting a faint glow on her face. She wasn't texting, but it was as if she couldn't let it go, couldn't let me see what was on it. That same phone, the one she'd been so secretive about for months, the one that had always been face down on the table or stuffed into her bag the moment I walked into the room. A million thoughts flooded my mind, but none of them seemed to stick. All I knew was that whatever was about to come out of her mouth would change everything. "Rob, I haven't been completely honest with you," she said, her voice cracking just slightly. I saw her grip tighten on the phone, her knuckles turning white. "There's someone else." At that moment, the world stopped spinning. My mind blanked. I felt a surge of cold rage and disbelief crash into me like a tidal wave. I had imagined something was wrong, sure. But this was a nightmare unfolding in real time, one that I wasn't ready to face. "What?" I whispered, barely able to force the words out. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said quickly, as if rehearsed. a defense she had been building for months. "I didn't plan this, Rob. It just happened. It's been going on for a while now." My heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. "How long?" She hesitated, her eyes darting to the floor as if it held the answer. 6 months. Maybe longer. 6 months. 6 goddamn months of lies, of pretending everything was fine, of her coming home to me after spending time with him. Every kiss, every smile, every moment between us felt like a lie in that instant. My thoughts spiraled, each one darker than the last. Who was he? How did she meet him? Was it someone from work? Was it during one of those girls' nights? The betrayal cut deep, and the questions clawed at me, demanding answers. Who is he? My voice was tight, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. I wasn't sure if I wanted to know, but at that moment, I needed to. Sherry didn't respond right away. She just stared at the table, her fingers still gripping that damn phone like a lifeline. When she finally spoke, it was barely above a whisper. "It's no one you know. Just someone from work." That was, all it took to push me over the edge. Someone from work. I had spent so many nights convincing myself that her late nights, her guarded phone, her distance, it was all just work stress, that things would go back to normal eventually. But here it was. The truth. Naked and brutal. "Someone from work?" I repeated, my voice rising with each word. "That's what this is? You've been screwing around with someone from work and I'm just supposed to… what? Accept that?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I couldn't tell if they were tears of guilt, of regret, or of fear for what came next. "I didn't mean for it to happen this way. I didn't want to hurt you." The rage boiled inside me, and I felt like I was on the verge of exploding. "You didn't want to hurt me? Sherry, do you hear yourself? You've been lying to me for months, and now you think an apology is going to fix this?" "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said softly, her voice trembling. "But I need you to know that it wasn't just about the sex. It's more than that. More than that." The words stung worse than anything else she could have said. So it wasn't just physical. She had been emotionally invested in this man, this stranger from work, while I had been going through the motions of a marriage I thought was still solid. I couldn't sit down. My legs were shaking, adrenaline coursing through me as I tried to process what she was telling me. I ran my hands through my hair, pacing in front of her, feeling like I was about to combust. "How long were you planning on keeping this from me?" I asked, my voice quieter now, more dangerous. "Were you going to leave me? Or were you just going to keep sneaking around until I caught you?" Her silence told me everything I needed to know. She didn't have an answer for that. She wasn't ready for this conversation, wasn't prepared to face the fallout of what she had done. For months, she had been living a double life, and now that it was out in the open, there was no turning back. "I don't know," she finally whispered, her head hanging low. "I didn't think it would get this far." I stopped pacing and stared at her. This woman I had loved for nearly a decade. This woman I thought I knew. She wasn't the same person sitting in front of me now. I didn't recognize her anymore. Everything we had built together, everything we had worked for, it all seemed so small and insignificant in the face of this betrayal. The house, the trips, the plans for the future. None of it mattered now. "So, what happens next?" I asked, my voice hollow, drained of emotion. I was too tired to be angry anymore. I just needed to know what the hell we were supposed to do now. She looked up at me with tear-streaked cheeks, her lips trembling. "I don't know, Rob. I don't know." Neither did I. The silence that followed her confession was deafening. I didn't know how to react, what to feel. The anger that had surged in me moments ago had dissipated, leaving behind a hollow ache in my chest. I stood there, staring at Sherry, the woman I had shared my life with for almost a decade, trying to reconcile this stranger with the person I thought I knew. We were at an impasse. She didn't know what to say, and neither did I. My mind was racing, replaying every moment from the past few months, trying to make sense of the small signs I'd ignored. The phone always flipped upside down, the late nights at the office, the sudden girls' nights that seemed to happen more often than usual. It was all so obvious now. How had I been so blind? I could feel my pulse hammering in my ears, my body tingling with the adrenaline of the revelation. I wanted to scream at her, demand to know why, how she could do this to us, to me. But something inside me held back. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was something deeper. Sadness? Betrayal? I didn't even know what to call it. "I can't believe this," I finally managed to say, my voice hoarse. "How could you do this, Sherry?" "Why?" She looked down at the floor, avoiding my gaze. "I didn't mean for it to happen." "You didn't mean for it to happen?" I echoed, incredulous. "So what? You just accidentally fell into bed with someone else?" Her face twisted in pain, her eyes glistening with fresh tears. "It's not like that, Rob. I swear, I didn't go looking for it, it just happened." "Stop saying that," I snapped. "Things like this don't just happen. You made a choice, Sherry. You chose to betray me." The weight of my words hung in the air, crushing both of us. She flinched at the word betray, as if hearing it out loud made it real for her too. Her shoulders slumped, and she wrapped her arms around herself, as if she were trying to hold the pieces of her crumbling world together. "I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I was lonely, Rob. You were always gone, and I don't know. I just needed someone to be there." I scoffed, unable to stop the bitterness from spilling out. "And what? I wasn't enough?" "That's not what I'm saying," she said quickly, shaking her head. "You're a great husband. You've always been there for me, but it's like we've been living separate lives for so long. You're always working. I'm always working. We've just drifted." Drifted. The word sounded so innocent, so benign, but it masked the ugliness beneath it. We hadn't just drifted. She had made a choice to step away from me, from us, and into someone else's arms. It wasn't some passive accident. "I don't care about the excuses, Sherry," I said, my voice cold and unfamiliar even to my own ears. "You made a decision. And now you're telling me this was all because you were lonely? That's your reason?" She sobbed softly, and for a brief moment I felt a pang of guilt. But it was fleeting. The hurt she had caused me, the betrayal, was too raw, too fresh. I couldn't find it in myself to comfort her. Not now. "How long?" I asked, dreading the answer. She hesitated, her eyes flitting back to the phone she still clutched tightly in her hand. 6 months. Maybe a little more. 6 months. Half a year of lying to my face. My stomach turned, the betrayal settling deeper into my bones. I tried to wrap my head around it, but every time I thought I had a grasp on the situation, it slipped away, leaving me more confused, more lost. "And it was just one guy? From work?" I didn't even know why I was asking. Maybe part of me hoped that it wasn't as bad as it seemed. Maybe it was just a fling, a stupid mistake that could be fixed. But deep down, I knew better. She nodded slowly. "Yes, just him." "Who is he?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. She swallowed hard, her eyes brimming with guilt. "His name is David. He works in marketing, at the office." The name didn't mean anything to me, but now he was someone I hated, someone who had been with my wife, who had seen parts of her that were supposed to be mine. My hands balled into fists, but I forced myself to stay calm. Losing control wouldn't help anything. "Does he know about me? About us?" I asked, my voice tight. Sherry nodded again. He knows everything." "Of course he does," I muttered under my breath. Of course this David knew. He knew about me, about our life, about the man Sherry went home to after spending her days, or nights, with him. And he didn't care. Why would he? He was getting what he wanted. I felt sick. I wanted to throw something, punch a wall, anything to release the tension building inside me. But I didn't. I couldn't. I just stood there, staring at her, unable to process the enormity of what had just happened to my life. So, what now? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She didn't answer right away. She just stared at me, tears streaming down her face, her body shaking. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke. "I don't know, Rob," she said, her voice breaking. "I don't know what happens next." I wanted to shout at her, to demand answers, to make her suffer the way I was suffering, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I just stood there, feeling more alone than I ever had in my entire life. We stood there, facing each other, two broken people in a broken marriage with no idea how to pick up the pieces, or if we even wanted to. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Sherry had cried herself to sleep next to me, but I felt like I was on fire. My thoughts kept circling back to the same questions. How long had she been planning to tell me? Would she have ever told me if I hadn't confronted her? I glanced at her sleeping form, her back turned to me, and felt a wave of sadness wash over me. This was the woman I had built my life with, the person I thought I'd spend the rest of my days with. And now, I didn't even know who she was anymore. Eventually, I couldn't take it. I quietly got out of bed, careful not to wake her, and walked into the living room. The house was dark, the only light coming from the street lamp outside, casting long shadows across the floor. I sat down on the couch, staring into the darkness, my mind numb. I didn't know what to do. Everything I thought I knew about my life, about my marriage, had been torn apart in the span of a single conversation. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, pulling me out of my thoughts. I reached for it, half expecting a work email, something to distract me from the storm raging inside my head. But it wasn't work. It was a message from Sherry. "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry." I stared at the message, my heart heavy. Sorry. The word felt meaningless now, a hollow apology for a wound that wouldn't heal. I didn't respond. I couldn't. All I could think was, this is only the beginning. The next morning, I woke up on the couch, stiff and sore from a night of restless sleep. My mind was still foggy, the events of the night before replaying over and over in my head like some kind of twisted movie reel. Sherry's confession hung heavy in the air, poisoning the house. I could still hear her voice, the tremor in her words when she told me about David, about her affair. The betrayal sat in my chest like a stone, making it hard to breathe. I didn't want to face her. I didn't want to sit at the same table, share the same space, pretend like anything between us was normal anymore. But life doesn't stop just because your world shatters. I had to keep moving, even if every step felt like it was dragging me deeper into a pit I couldn't climb out of. Sherry was in the kitchen when I finally dragged myself up. She was still in her robe, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee in front of her, staring blankly out the window. The same silence from the night before stretched between us, thick and suffocating. She looked like she'd barely slept either, her eyes puffy, her face pale. But I couldn't bring myself to care. Not today. I walked past her without a word, heading straight for the coffee maker, hoping the strong brew would at least kick my brain into functioning mode. The silence in the room was unbearable, but I wasn't ready to break it. Not yet. But Sherry spoke first. "Rob." Her voice was soft, hesitant. "I don't know what to say. I don't even know where to start." I kept my back to her, focusing on the rhythmic drip of the coffee, the smell filling the kitchen. I didn't answer right away because, honestly, I didn't know what to say either. What was there to say after something like this? "You already said it all?" I finally replied, my voice flat, emotionless. "What's left to say?" "I didn't want it to come out this way," she continued, her voice shaking slightly. "I never wanted to hurt you. I let out a bitter laugh, the sound foreign even to my own ears. Yeah, you've said that. She flinched at the coldness in my tone, and part of me felt guilty, but that part was buried deep under layers of anger and confusion. I couldn't just let her off the hook with an apology, not after what she'd done. Rob, please, she whispered, her voice pleading now. I made a mistake. A terrible, terrible mistake. I wasn't thinking clearly. I was lost. Lost? I repeated, turning around to face her, coffee mug in hand. You were lost? Is that what you're calling it now? You've been screwing some guy behind my back for months, and now you're lost? Tears welled up in her eyes, and I could see her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the table. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, she just shook her head, as if trying to deny the gravity of her actions. I don't even know who you are anymore, I said quietly, more to myself than to her. The woman sitting in front of me was a stranger. The Sherry I married, the one I built a life with, was gone, replaced by this person who had lied to me for half a year, who had betrayed everything we had. I'm still me, she said desperately, standing up from the table, her eyes wide and pleading. I know I've messed up. I know I've hurt you, but Rob, I'm still me. I still love you. I set my coffee down on the counter, the mug clinking against the granite as I stared at her. Love. That word felt so cheap now, coming from her. How could she say she loved me after what she'd done? You don't do this to someone you love, Sherry, I said, my voice cracking with the weight of my emotions. You don't lie, cheat, and destroy everything, and then try to tell me you still love me. She wiped at her eyes, her hands shaking, and for a moment I saw a glimpse of the Sherry I used to know, the one who laughed at my stupid jokes, who kissed me on the forehead when she thought I was asleep, who made me feel like the luckiest guy in the world. But that was gone now, replaced by this broken version of her. I'm sorry, she whispered again, but this time the words sounded hollow, like she was saying them because she didn't know what else to say. Sorry doesn't fix this, I replied, my tone harsh, even though I wasn't trying to be. I was just tired. Tired of the lies, the pain, the pretending. You've already torn us apart, Sherry. I don't even know how to begin to forgive you for this. I didn't want it to go this far, she said, her voice cracking. I swear I didn't. It just happened. I was lonely, and he was there, and… Stop, I cut her off, shaking my head. Just stop. I didn't want to hear any more excuses. I didn't care how lonely she felt, or how this guy David had wormed his way into her life. None of it mattered. What mattered was the betrayal, the fact that she had chosen to break our marriage, to break me without a second thought. The silence between us stretched out again, thick with unspoken words and unresolved anger. I didn't know what to do next. Part of me wanted to throw her out of the house, to slam the door in her face and never look back. But another part of me, the part that still loved her, despite everything, wanted to hold her, to make her promise it was all a mistake and that we could somehow fix it. But we couldn't. Not now. Maybe not ever. I need space, I finally said, my voice hollow. I can't do this right now. Her face crumpled at my words, her tears falling freely now. Rob, please don't push me away. We can work through this. I know we can. I shook my head. I need time to think, to figure out what the hell I'm supposed to do next. Rob, just go, I said, my voice breaking. Please, I can't do this right now. She stood there for a moment, as if hoping I'd change my mind. But when I didn't say anything else, she slowly turned and walked toward the bedroom. I heard the door close softly behind her, leaving me alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the wreckage of our marriage. I sank into a chair at the table, burying my face in my hands. The weight of everything crashed down on me at once. The lies, the betrayal, the overwhelming sense of loss. I didn't know how we were supposed to come back from this, if we even could. For the first time in years, I felt completely alone. Not just because Sherry had betrayed me, but because everything I had believed in, everything I had worked for, felt like it was slipping through my fingers. I didn't know how to fix this. I didn't know if it could be fixed. And the worst part? I wasn't sure if I even wanted to try. That day, I stayed in the house, wandering through the rooms like a ghost, unable to settle. I checked my phone more times than I could count, but there were no messages, no calls. I debated calling my best friend, but what could I say? That my marriage had just imploded? That the woman I thought I'd spend my life with had been cheating on me? I was still reeling from the shock. The pain was too fresh, too raw, and I didn't know how to voice it yet. So, I stayed silent, kept it all inside, where the hurt festered and grew. By the time the sun began to set, I found myself sitting on the porch, watching the sky turn from a soft orange to a deep purple. The world outside was still moving, still going on like nothing had changed. But for me, everything had. As the darkness crept in, I realized something. This was just the beginning. The betrayal had been revealed, but the fallout hadn't even started. And I had no idea how far down this spiral would go. The days that followed were a blur. I went through the motions, wake up, go to work, come home, sleep, but it all felt like I was just surviving, not living. Sherry and I barely spoke, and when we did, it was short, strained exchanges, like we were tiptoeing around a ticking time bomb. There was no way to avoid the fact that our lives were falling apart. The house that once felt warm, like a sanctuary, was now cold and suffocating. Every room seemed to echo with the ghosts of the life we had before. At work, I was on autopilot. My colleagues noticed, but no one said anything. I think they could tell something was off, but I wasn't about to start talking about it with them. What could I say? That my wife had been cheating on me for months, and I was too much of a coward to confront the situation head-on? That I was living in the same house as the woman who had betrayed me, too angry to stay, too broken to leave? Sherry tried. I'll give her that. She wanted to talk, to explain, to somehow smooth over the wreckage of our marriage, but I wasn't ready. Every time she approached me, I'd shut her down before she could even begin. I didn't want to hear her apologies. I didn't want to hear how she'd been lost, or how she didn't mean for this to happen. The betrayal was too fresh, too painful. One evening, about a week after her confession, she came into the living room while I was watching TV. I'd been avoiding her for days, crashing on the couch instead of sleeping in the bed next to her, because the thought of lying next to her was unbearable. She stood there for a minute, unsure of what to say, and I pretended to be engrossed in whatever was on the screen, though I wasn't really watching. "Rob," she said softly, her voice tentative. "Can we please talk? We can't keep going on like this." I didn't answer right away. I stared at the screen, my jaw tight, trying to suppress the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. When I finally spoke, my voice was clipped, cold. "Talk about what?" I asked, still not looking at her. "You've said everything, haven't you? What else is there to say?" She stepped closer, her eyes pleading. "I know you're angry. I know I hurt you, but we have to talk about this. We can't just pretend it didn't happen." I laughed bitterly. "Oh, trust me, I'm not pretending it didn't happen. I'm reminded of it every time I look at you." She winced at my words, but I didn't care. I wanted her to feel some fraction of the pain she had caused me, wanted her to understand just how deeply she had shattered everything between us. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice trembling. "I know that doesn't fix anything, but I can't lose you, Rob. I don't want to lose us." I finally looked at her then, my eyes narrowing. "You should have thought about that before you decided to screw around behind my back." Her face crumpled, and tears welled up in her eyes, but I wasn't moved. I couldn't be. Not now. I had been too hurt, too betrayed to feel any sympathy for her. Rob, please. We can work through this. We've been through so much together. Don't throw it all away because of one mistake. One mistake? I repeated, incredulous. This wasn't just one mistake, Sherry. This was 6 months, half a year of lies. You didn't just make a mistake. You made a choice every single day to betray me. Don't try to downplay what you did. I'm not downplaying it, she sobbed. I'm just trying to make you see that I still love you, that I made a horrible decision, but I want to fix this. I need to fix this. I shook my head, feeling the weight of her words pressing down on me. Love. That word had been thrown around so much in the past week, but what did it even mean anymore? How could she claim to love me after what she'd done? You don't love me, I said flatly. Not if you could do this. Not if you could look me in the eye every day and lie to my face. I do love you, she insisted, her voice rising with desperation. I love you, Rob. I never stopped loving you. You're full of it, I spat. You don't know what love is. Her tears were flowing freely now, and she looked like she was about to collapse under the weight of it all. But I couldn't find it in myself to care. I was too angry, too hurt. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, she said, her voice breaking. But I'm asking for it anyway. I'm begging you. Please, Rob, don't walk away from us. I stood up, unable to sit there and listen to her anymore. The walls felt like they were closing in, and I needed to get out, needed air. I need some space, I said, my voice cold. I can't do this right now. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door. Sherry didn't try to stop me, but I could feel her eyes on my back, her silent plea hanging in the air between us. I drove aimlessly for a while, the city lights blurring past me as I tried to clear my head. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles were white, my mind racing. I couldn't stop thinking about it, about her, about him. David. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them together, saw the betrayal playing out in my mind like a cruel movie reel that I couldn't turn off. The pain was overwhelming. I had never felt anything like it before. This deep, gnawing ache that seemed to eat away at me from the inside. I had always thought that if something like this ever happened, I'd be strong enough to walk away, to leave, and never look back. But now that I was in it, now that I was faced with the reality of my wife's infidelity, I didn't know what to do. I drove for hours, eventually pulling into a quiet parking lot near the water. The waves lapped gently at the shore, the sound of the ocean calming, but it did little to quiet the storm raging inside me. I got out of the car and leaned against the hood, staring out at the dark horizon, wondering what the hell I was supposed to do next. Should I leave her? Was that the answer? Could I really just walk away from everything we'd built together? The thought of it made my chest tighten. But staying, how could I ever trust her again? How could I ever look at her without seeing the lies, the betrayal, the nights she spent with him instead of me? I wanted to hate her. I wanted to be angry enough to leave, to cut her out of my life and never look back. But there was still a part of me, a small, stupid part of me, that loved her, that wanted to believe we could somehow fix this, that we could go back to the way things were before. But could we? I didn't know. I wasn't sure of anything anymore. When I finally got back home, it was late. The house was dark, and Sherry was already in bed, or at least I assumed she was. I stood in the hallway for a moment, staring at the closed bedroom door, wondering if I should go in, if I should try to talk to her. But the thought of lying next to her, pretending like things could be normal again, made my stomach churn. So, I grabbed a blanket from the hall closet and lay down on the couch. It was uncomfortable, and I knew I wouldn't sleep much, but at least it gave me some distance, some space. I needed time to think, to figure out what the hell I was going to do. As I lay there in the dark, staring up at the ceiling, the weight of the situation pressed down on me. This wasn't something that could be fixed with a few apologies or a couple of therapy sessions. This was a deep, festering wound, and I didn't know if it would ever heal. And the worst part? I wasn't sure if I even wanted it to. Days turned into weeks, and the weight of Sherry's betrayal sat heavy, in the air, thick like a fog that never lifted. It seeped into every part of my life, coloring everything in shades of bitterness and resentment. The few times we exchanged words, it was brief, like strangers forced to live under the same roof. I went to work, she went to work, and we both tiptoed around each other in the spaces between, avoiding the inevitable confrontation that loomed over us like a dark cloud. I slept on the couch every night. At first, Sherry tried to coax me back into our bed, pleading with her eyes, but eventually she stopped asking. The couch became my new home, and I found myself getting used to it. I'd lie there late at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering how we had gotten to this point. Wondering how the life we'd built together could unravel so completely, so quickly. I couldn't shake the image of her with him. David. It haunted me, even in the quiet moments. I imagined them together, in those stolen moments at work, maybe in some dark hotel room while I was away on one of my business trips. It was the not knowing that killed me, wondering how many times it happened, how often she thought of him when she was with me. Every time I closed my eyes, the scenes played out in my mind, vivid and cruel. I had tried not to ask too many questions, but that only made it worse. The gaps in the story left room for my imagination to fill in the blanks, and I couldn't stop my mind from running wild. One Saturday morning, as I sat at the kitchen table nursing my coffee, Sherry walked in. She looked like hell. Her hair was a mess, and her face was drawn, with dark circles under her eyes. She wasn't sleeping much either. We were both living in this purgatory, trapped between a past that was gone and a future that seemed impossible. She stood there for a moment, as if gathering her courage, before finally speaking. "We need to talk," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't respond right away. I was tired of talking, tired of rehashing the same arguments, the same excuses. But there was something in her tone, something different this time, that made me put down my coffee and look at her. "About what?" I asked, though I already knew what was coming. She took a deep breath, her hands wringing together nervously. "About us. About what happens now." I sighed, rubbing my temples. I'd been dreading this conversation for weeks, but I knew it was coming. We couldn't keep living like this, in limbo. At some point, we had to decide what the hell we were going to do. "Okay," I said, gesturing for her to sit down. She pulled out a chair and sat across from me, her eyes downcast. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice shaky, "about everything, about what I did, about how much I hurt you, and I know that I can't undo any of it, but I need to know if there's any chance at all, that we can move past this." I stared at her, not sure how to respond. I didn't know if we could move past it. Hell, I didn't even know if I wanted to. The pain was still too fresh, too raw. Every time I looked at her, I saw the lies, the betrayal, the months she spent with someone else while pretending to still love me. "I don't know, Sherry," I said honestly. "I really don't know." Her face crumpled, and she nodded, as if she had expected that answer. "I get it. I do. I know I messed up, and I know I don't deserve anything from you. But Rob, I love you. I still love you, and I want to fight for us. I want to fix this." I laughed bitterly. "How do you fix this? How do you fix a marriage that's been broken like this? You can't just slap a Band-Aid on it and pretend it didn't happen." "I'm not pretending it didn't happen," she said, her voice rising. "I'm not asking you to forget it or to act like everything's fine. I know it's not. But Rob, I need to know if there's even a small part of you that still wants to try." Her words hung in the air, and I could feel the weight of them pressing down on me. Did I want to try? That was the question, wasn't it? Part of me wanted to scream at her, to tell her that she had destroyed everything, that there was nothing left to save. But another part of me, the part that still loved her, that still remembered the good times, the life we had built together, wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way through this. But how? How am I supposed to trust you again? I asked, my voice quieter now. How am I supposed to believe anything you say when you lied to me for months? Every time I look at you, I think about him, about what you did with him. She flinched at my words, tears welling up in her eyes again. I know that I destroyed your trust, and I'm not asking for you to just give it back, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn it back, Rob. I'm willing to go to therapy, to work on this, to do whatever you need, but I can't do it alone. I need you to meet me halfway. Halfway? I scoffed, shaking my head. You're asking for a lot, Sherry. You're asking me to trust you after you spent months lying to my face. You're asking me to pretend like I don't see him every time I look at you. She wiped at her eyes, her hands trembling. I'm not asking you to pretend. I know this will take time. I know it'll be hard. But Rob, we've been through so much together. Please don't throw it all away. I stood up, pacing the kitchen, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. I wanted to scream, to yell, to tell her that it was over, that I could never forgive her for what she'd done. But I couldn't say the words. I couldn't make myself leave. Because deep down, part of me still wanted to believe that we could find a way through this. That maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild the trust she had shattered. But was that even possible? Look, I said, turning to face her, my hands on the counter, gripping the edge. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if we can fix this, but I'm not ready to walk away yet. I need time. Her face lit up with a flicker of hope, but I was quick to temper it. Don't get your hopes up, Sherry. I'm not making any promises. She nodded, her tears flowing again, but this time there was relief in her eyes. Thank you. I know it's not much, but thank you. I didn't say anything else. I couldn't. I didn't know how to feel. Didn't know if I was making the right choice or just delaying the inevitable. All I knew was that walking away wasn't as easy as I thought it would be. In the days that followed, Sherry kept her distance, respecting the space I had asked for. She didn't push for more conversations, didn't try to force me into forgiving her. Instead, she gave me the time I needed, as if she knew that pressing me too hard would push me further away. I appreciated it, but the pain was still there, gnawing at me, constantly reminding me of what had happened. I would catch glimpses of her around the house, folding laundry, making dinner, going about her day as if trying to put the pieces of our shattered lives back together. But nothing felt normal. Nothing felt the same. One night I found myself staring at my phone, scrolling through social media, aimlessly clicking through old pictures of us, photos from trips, anniversaries, birthdays. I could see the smiles on our faces, the way we used to look at each other, the love that seemed so strong, so real, and yet all of it felt so distant now, like it belonged to another life, another couple. I couldn't bring myself to delete the pictures, even though I wanted to. I wasn't ready to let go of the memories, of the life we had built. But I wasn't ready to forgive either. And that's when it hit me. Maybe I wasn't staying because I wanted to fix things. Maybe I was staying because I didn't know how to let go. The next morning, I woke up with a new sense of clarity. I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know if we could rebuild the trust that had been lost. But I knew one thing for sure. Whatever happened next, I needed to be honest with myself. I needed to stop pretending that everything could go back to the way it was. Because it couldn't. Things had changed. We had changed. And the road ahead, whether we walked it together or apart, was going to be hard. Weeks had passed, each day blending into the next. Sherry and I were still in the same house, still following the same routine, but it was clear that we were both just going through the motions. The unspoken tension between us lingered like a heavy fog, impossible to shake off. The therapy sessions we had agreed to weren't helping. We sat in a room together, talked about trust and healing, but the words felt hollow. There was no way to stitch together the pieces of something that had been shattered so violently. I was exhausted, emotionally, mentally, physically. I felt like I had been running in circles, trying to figure out what the hell I was doing, why I hadn't walked away. Every time I looked at her, I still saw him. David. The man she had chosen, even if only for a few months, over me. No amount of therapy or apologies could erase that image from my mind. I didn't say it out loud, but I had already made my decision. I just hadn't told her yet. It was late one Friday night, and the house was silent. I was in the living room, sitting on the couch, nursing a beer while the TV played quietly in the background. Sherry was upstairs, likely trying to sleep, though I knew she hadn't been getting much rest lately either. The weight of everything between us hung in the air, suffocating us both. I couldn't sleep, not with what was coming. I had already packed a bag. It wasn't much, just some clothes, toiletries, and a few essentials. It was all I needed for now. I wasn't sure where I was going or what my next step would be, but I knew I couldn't stay here any longer. This house, this marriage, it was a prison now, and I had to leave before it destroyed me completely. I had planned to leave in the morning, without a big confrontation, without any drama. But part of me knew that wasn't possible. Things never ended cleanly, especially not when it came to something as messy as this. The sound of footsteps on the stairs broke through my thoughts. Sherry appeared at the bottom of the staircase, wearing her robe, her face pale and drawn in the dim light. She hesitated for a moment when she saw me, as if debating whether or not to approach. "Rob?" Her voice was soft, tentative, like she was afraid of what she might hear. "Can we talk?" I sighed, setting my beer down on the table. "Sherry, it's late. I don't think—" "Please," she interrupted, stepping closer. "I know it's late, but we can't keep avoiding this. I know something's going on. You've been distant, more than before. I need to know what you're thinking, what's going to happen with us." I felt my chest tighten. I had been dreading this conversation, but now it was here, and there was no avoiding it. I couldn't keep lying to myself, or to her. "I'm leaving, Sherry," I said, my voice flat, emotionless. Her eyes widened in shock. "What? What do you mean?" "I mean I'm leaving," I repeated, standing up from the couch, the words heavy in the air between us. "I can't do this anymore." She stared at me, disbelief washing over her face, as if she hadn't seen this coming, as if she hadn't known, deep down, that this was inevitable. "Rob, no, you can't." She took a step toward me, her hands shaking. "We've been trying. We've been going to therapy. We can fix this. Please, we just need more time." I shook my head, the finality of the decision settling in my bones. "It's not about more time, Sherry. It's about the fact that I can't trust you anymore. I can't get past what you did." Tears filled her eyes, and she reached out to grab my arm, but I pulled away, the contact too much, too painful. "I know I hurt you," she sobbed, her voice breaking. "But we've been through so much together. We can't just give up now. I love you, Rob. Please don't walk away from us." I closed my eyes, willing myself not to break, not to let the pain of the moment overwhelm me. I had loved her once, more than anything, but that love had been poisoned, tainted by her betrayal. And no matter how much she begged, no matter how many apologies she offered, it would never be the same. "I can't do it anymore," I whispered, my voice heavy with the truth I had been avoiding for so long. "I tried. I really tried, Sherry. But every time I look at you, all I see is him. All I see are the lies, the months you spent with someone else while I was here, trying to make things work. I can't live like that." She collapsed onto the couch, her face buried in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. "Please, don't go. I wanted to feel something, anger, sadness, anything. But I was numb. The weight of everything had crushed the emotions out of me, leaving me hollow, exhausted. "I'm sorry," I said, the words falling flat. "But this is over." She looked up at me, her tear-streaked face filled with desperation. "Rob, we can get through this. I know we can. Just, just give me another chance." I shook my head, picking up my bag and slinging it over my shoulder. "I can't give you another chance, Sherry. Not this time." And with that, I walked toward the door. I could hear her sobbing behind me, her pleas echoing in the silence of the house. But I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I did, I wasn't sure I'd be able to leave. I stepped outside, the cold night air hitting me like a slap to the face. It was dark, the streets empty, the only sound the distant hum of traffic. I stood there for a moment, taking it all in, feeling the weight of what I had just done settle over me. This was it. The end of everything we had built together, the life we had shared, the memories, the love. It was all gone now, swept away by the storm of betrayal that had torn us apart. I didn't know what the future held for me. I didn't know if I would ever be able to trust again, if I would ever be able to let someone in after what had happened. But as I walked down the street, my footsteps echoing in the quiet, I knew one thing for sure. I was free. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could finally breathe.